Loud.
Yes,
All right.
thank you.
Sorry, everybody. Okay.
Andrea is just saying we've all been there, Mark. So wherever no one is chomping their teeth at you.
Now, what I don't like now is I can't see you, but maybe that's okay.
Now, will
Maybe I'll
this
have
be
to.
the cloud that Christ is coming on that we were supposed to get it off of?
Oh my God,
Wow.
the very same. Yes,
Right.
I'm just gonna say yes,
Yep.
since this is being recorded.
Right. So good to be with you in this way again. And I can't believe how quickly the imagination for this has moved into reality, and now the landing gear is on, or landing gear is down, and we're ready to land this thing. This is part three of the three-part series on what my wife refers to as giving pastors grief. I think it's better than that. I hope it's better than that. But I'd like to just recap the last two times together. The first time, the things that I recall, maybe you bring to the surface is ministry is grief work, and that's very different than what I learned in seminary, which was sort of about being a pioneering congregation for the community and for the world. And I don't want to give any of that up, but it may just first and foremost, in the language of James Dittus in Recalling Ministry, about before you can do that kind of thing, you need to work through the griefs and the losses. He wrote that long before this pandemic. And the second insight is that churches operate in a culture of loss. And we talked about before how nostalgia is a form of grief. And so congregations that are perpetually looking back and that are dealing with loss of membership and loss of funds and wishing that the church was once again the church of the 50s and 60s and maybe even 90s when churches in this country were in the US, I should say, were booming. And all of that, uh, pastors need to be in tune that before uh, moving forward, I think we have to process not only what's happened, but what's happening even as we speak. Third point is pastors cannot do it alone. Some of us left seminary as lone rangers and pretty excited about how we were going to change the world and change the church. And I think what some of us are increasingly recognizing is that that's foolhardy. That's foolhardy to think that we can um, do this on our own. And if you've been here before, you've heard me say that even good friendships and a great spousal or partnership relationship, I think the needs and the demands of church is more than our spouses or our partners can bear. And so I think we need a specialized relationship, someone who can speak the truth in love and who can hold our stuff with us. Number four is we don't know what we don't know, and a lot of what we bring to the ministry experience is our own baggage, and some of our baggage is good, and even the hard stuff is can be very useful for ministry, but we need to know what that stuff is. A, we need to know that we have a blind spot. B, we need to know what's in it, and C, we need help with dealing with that, and that too is not something we can do alone. And I want to affirm that when we know the terrain of loss for ourselves and we've processed it, I think it becomes our most vital resource for ministry. My denominational tradition put a great emphasis on knowing church history and on knowing the foreign languages, Hebrew and Greek. We took that for years and years and years, and that was a highly prized value, enough that we did it uh, excessively. What I want to continue to affirm, that the foreign language that I never got in seminary was the language of loss and understanding that. And for me personally, I think I've shared with you that CPE 4 units of that and therapy has been immensely helpful and probably some of my most important education as a pastor. That's that's a 5-minute recap of 2 hours the first time around. The second time we talked about mental models. So everything in the world happens twice, first in the imagination and then in the physical world. And what attachment theory teaches us is that we have learned a mental model, a construct of how relationships work, and that's a model that we continue to work with as we enter into life, as we grow up, and certainly as we become professionals. We're not always aware of how the dynamics of relationships impact us. So if you're familiar with transference, attachment theory teaches us that relationships that we have now are in many ways an expression of transference from previous ones. So I often find it remarkable that in the churches that I've served, a Tom in a previous congregation keeps showing up in this one. Well, he's not here, but he's here, or he's here, and that just is another reminder that I'm engaging something inside of me in my own history that's not fair to the Tom who's here, but I need to know that. So mental models. We before we build a house, we draw blueprints. As we do relationships, we've got blueprints on how they work, whether we realize it or not. Before someone makes a chair or a desk or a table, they imagine it first and then they construct it. And that to me is a powerful awareness for pastors. Last time I shared my research study results that say if you as a pastor want to be a transformational leader, meaning you want to work with people, you want that relationship to be solid, you want to grow from them, you want them to grow from you, you want to raise levels of morality, motivation, and morale, which transformational leadership is all about. You may be putting your longevity at risk. And I want to say, as part of your call, I think it's a risk worth taking. But just like any job where you need to know the risks, if you're operating an excavator or you're in a environment with a lot of electricity or whatever, you need to know the risks. And for pastors, some of the risks are more interpersonal, they're family systems related, and the risks are that there's going to be a lot of projection placed on you, and there's going to be a lot of anxiety in the system. And one of the dashboard indicators could be addictive coping mechanisms, numbing mechanisms, obesity, lack of exercise. All of those could be dashboard indicators for us of some of the risks of the work that we do. I shared with you that pastors are generally satisfied, more satisfied than other leaders, and that pastors' need for affirmation, uh, statistically, from a research scientifically perspective, definitely shortens their longevity in their congregations. So, the more needy you find yourself being, or your congregation finds you, the more likely that you may be shortening your tenure. What I forgot to say is that we can get what we never had. So if you say, I look at my upbringing and I probably have some avoidant attachment or I have some anxious attachment, I'm either cautious about getting close or I'm clingy with people. What I want to say is the good news of that through Bowlby and Ainsworth, who studied this, is that you and I can find that if we didn't have it when we were growing up. We can find that in a close friendship. We can find security in a therapist and in a romantic partner. And there's scientific demonstration for that. What's more troubling to me is that pastors with profound attachment security can find that taken away when the going gets really rough and you lose your spouse, you lose a child, you lose a parent or a dear friend. you lose a significant leader in the congregation who's been working well with you, and that can disrupt your attachment security. And that's just yet another reason for, I think, an ongoing relationship with a therapist, because during the steady times, you've established a relationship, and then when the crisis comes, you've already got that relationship as a pre-existing secure base for yourself, that now you've got that when something else is taken away. Last time I talked about the work of the leader is to grow trust, and that happens through listening, empowering. It comes through delivering more than you promised, and even earlier. It comes from naming mistakes and being transparent about them, and then name the learnings from that as well. Number four is that we're a key part of the emotional system that needs to change. So change happens best when we try and change the way people relate to one another rather than trying to change their minds. So some of us are really big on crafting policy and vision statements and all of that, and I don't want to take away from any of that, because I do it just like you do it. But when I begin to look at when my influence has been the most significant in a congregation is when you change the way uh, people are relating to one another, how they communicate with one another, and you just institute a small change in behavior, and a year or two later, it changes the way they think, and sometimes changes the way we think. And I think for long-term change, that's the kind of thing that I find myself wanting to put my energy into, even as we write mission statements and vision statements and policy, all of which again is important, but somehow those things have to be held in balance.
Hey,
I
Mark, can
didn't,
I
yeah,
interrupt you for a
yeah,
minute?
please do. Thank you.
Did you have a PowerPoint you were going to share?
Is my PowerPoint not sharing?
No.
Oh man,
Oh, I bet he worked hard on that
I
too.
am
So,
such a loser.
well,
Uh,
no, you're not. Well,
all
good
right.
looking in theology, right? We're all learning.
Yeah, that's right.
Uh,
So
but no,
let's,
I think once we stop for you to start recording, then we just didn't get back to that.
thank you for not waiting so long to, I would
Well,
have hated to get the slide number
someone
12 and,
texted me and said, was he going to share his PowerPoint? And I was like, I will ask him.
oh
So
yeah. And
good people
and
are.
that and now I'm actually getting to see you again, and
There it is.
I like that.
Sorry
Right
about
from
that.
the beginning. No, okay. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. Um, I'm not going to do an Ace Ventura and try and talk backwards. So here are the 5 points, and you'll get these. We'll send these to you. Grief work, operate in a culture of loss. Pastors can't do it alone. We don't know what we don't know. Knowing the terrain of loss for yourself. Second, mental models, my research study results, and then I put in bold there what I forgot to say. We grow trust, and we're part of an emotional system that needs to change. So, going back to mental models, everything happens in the world twice. I shared with you last time about um, the Tom Swift books that were the earliest science fiction, and a researcher said, "Well, what got people interested in science, especially young men? Well, it was watching Gilligan's Island and seeing the professor, and it was people who also watched Star Trek." And I find it fascinating that the first flip phone, or the first real cell phone that came out, was a flip phone. Well, where did that imagination come from? Well, Gene Roddenberry in the 60s had Captain Kirk uh, walking around with his own cell phone, and it was a flip one. It's amazing to me to think about what we conceptualize, what we read about in literature, the stories we pay attention to begin to shape and form our lives. And we know that in a modern setting with how news and media shapes and forms an imagination and a conception of the world. And the big question, to steal a phrase from Robert Weber, is so who gets to narrate the world? And pastors, every Sunday and in the culture of our work, are narrating an imagination for the congregation, and that just puts an extreme value and an importance on what all of us are doing and trying to do, because the imagination that we give to the congregation on a week by week basis is going to impact them, even when sometimes it feels like it's not. And sometimes they're pushing back against you because they know that um, what you're saying and what you're modeling is important, and it may be threatening to the way they're imagining and conceiving the world. And that's the hard work of being a prophet, of staying in that tension of speaking God's word, or what you believe to be God's word, for your community, especially when they don't want to hear it. And all you have to do is read the prophets, Jeremiah and Moses and others, who say, I don't want to do this. And in Jeremiah 1, God says, well, that's nice, but get moving. So, my simple outline for today, because my goal is to maybe do my part until the top of the hour, and then reserve an hour for some discussion, feedback. Let's see where we can go. Is I want to name what I see as 5 COVID dynamics that are changing the way we think about and do church. I want to pause, and then I want to talk about leading by learning in relationship together, and talk about one more book for Lily to buy you. Sound good? Any questions on that? I'm going to keep rolling. COVID-19 dynamics. These are, I hope that when we go to discussion that you say, no, I think there's some more. That's good, because this is coming out of my experience, and it's coming out of my encounters as a regional pastor, and there could easily be more, but this is me that I'm bringing to you today. I believe the church is in a state of regression. I think what happens when human beings are in a state of anxiety, and I think we have to name it, that our culture has been in a year-long state of trauma. Now, oftentimes trauma happens, and then a traumatic event happens, and then 3 weeks later, the symptoms show up. We're not done with this yet, and it continues to go on. So the church finds itself in a survival mode, and strengths have presented themselves. People come out of the woodwork in new ways that maybe we see in our congregations, in ourselves, or in our colleagues. But I want to say I think they've come at an enormously high cost. Second, anxiety and fear and distrust and fears and frustrations with what has been lost are ever present, or they're being denied. So I sat in a leadership meeting on Monday night with my board is called a council, and so there were, I want to say, 20 of us, distancing and whatever. And last Sunday, I had prayed in the congregational prayer about, it's been a long year. This is the 1 year anniversary of when we went into quarantine, and just wanted to acknowledge that, acknowledge the gratitude for the good things that have come up in the life of the congregation. But let's just acknowledge that this has been hard, and thanks be to God for the ways in which we've remained stitched together. And I prayed that, and I heard from 3 people in that meeting say, I don't want to hear about masks. I don't want to hear about COVID-19. I am so done with this that I want to come to church and not. I don't want us praying for this stuff anymore. I come to church to forget all of this, and I found myself just really mindful of there is a strong power of denial at work. And I just learned today, like, I logged on late because one of the people in that room, using immense precautions, was COVID-19 positive. She found out yesterday. And today, after this meeting, I have to enact our communications and procedural strategies around what to do in a state like this. So even that email that's going to come to my leadership is going to poke the bruise of denial. And in the person who contracted the COVID now, she's been so careful. Today I just heard almost depressive despair around, I'm t- Pastor, I'm trying to do the right things. You know what? And I must have screwed up somewhere. And both of those voices and moods are in our body life together. The third point I want to make is that doubts and revisiting and strongly questioning the past is taking place a lot in churches now. So, um, my analog for this would be, I don't know if this has been your experience or not, but when a marriage partnership uh, separates and then divorces, and there's 7-year olds or 9-year olds or 11-year olds, I'm often amazed how resilient these kids are, and they find a way through. I am equally amazed that when this happens, and the kids, the offsprung, are 25 or 27 years old, how hard it is on them, because not only are they dealing with the separation and the divorce of their parents, but they're calling into question every part of their upbringing. So, was this a lie? Was this, and they're filled with immense doubts and grief and pain. And my experience, and I, later I welcome you to challenge it or tell a different story, is to say that uh, it almost seems like the older you are when your parents get divorced, that the harder it is on you, because you not only have to face a future, but you're questioning the past. And that, to me, that feels pastorally like where the church is right now, with the reality that we are inhabiting. Almost when I read Jesus' words from Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Or Matthew's words for Jesus in that text. It's the astonishment. It's how could this happen to me? How could this happen to us? And feel in the push of pull of that in our congregations, and with that is a withdrawing and a survival mode, and a regression into to basic survival mode. So that's point number one about COVID dynamics. Number two, I want to say that in my experience, a church's pre-existing conditions have shown themselves, and they show themselves in the underlying tensions that maybe weren't named, now coming at faster speed. So imagine you saying, you as a pastor saying, in 6 months or in 18 months, I could see this being an issue in our church. Well, my sense is that COVID has sped that process up, and now whatever those things are here sooner than they were expected. Number two, I see smaller things that didn't weigh much. The nurse says, "Well, Mark, how much does this hurt right now on a scale of 1 to 10?" And I say a 3. Well, in COVID world, it seems like that's an 8 or a 9. And it seems like in the life of our body, people are getting honked or tweaked about silly things. The picky people are even pickier, and now the picking seems to weigh more. And it seems to me too that everything is taking longer to process. I mean, that's a grief response or a trauma response, that everything is more laborious. It's like walking through uh, mud. It's just taking longer, and it seems like you have to over communicate, and people still aren't getting it. And it seems like these are dynamics that maybe you say, well, yeah, of course, but I think we need to name them, and I think we need to ponder them and probably talk about them. Number three, remember again, I think I had five of them. So COVID changes the way we relate to each other and relate to being the church. So in my community, it's part of the narrative of this small rural town that sometime in the 60s, a tornado cut through here and it nearly destroyed the town. And I've heard about and I imagine people coming together with their tractors and their chainsaws and some women making casseroles and some men operating chainsaws. And I feel free to use those gender specific things because they were 50 years ago. I'm not saying they should be operative now, but it was true back then, at least here. Um, and people pitching together and becoming neighbors in new ways, and so a disaster strikes and everybody pulls together and works together. Well, COVID, as we know, is has not done that. It's, if anything, this disaster for our communities has divided us, and it's raised the theological and the political differences, and they continue to poke a finger in our eye. Number two, members were not likely monogamous with their community before the pandemic. I always hear about, oh, Pastor, I wish your sermons were like the ones I watch when I watch Charles Stanley or some other people that I don't know. Well, thanks. Yeah, I'm not Charles Stanley, and I'm okay with that. But I have people here who have cottages up north, so in the summertime they go up north and they go to other churches, and people who go to Arizona and Florida in the wintertime and they go to other churches. And in my shop, regular attenders pre-COVID were probably coming twice out of 4 Sundays. Well, that's very different than it was a generation ago. And now with COVID, whether it's going to different YouTube services or shopping around with their church shopping, I think it's even more common for people, if I keep the image going about monogamy, to be ecclesiastically promiscuous. And I use that word pair in my leadership meeting uh, last week, and my wonderful blue collar and other folks said, "Yeah, if you're using words like ecclesiastically promiscuous, Pastor, you've got way too many degrees." So I'll say it with you though, because they're giving me friendly crap when they say that. Last is churches that have been about sharing physical space will have to expand their relationship with digital mediums. And I want to be the first to say, I don't want to. I was totally against live streaming our services until we went into quarantine, and then I said to our techies, "You got to turn it out. You got find a way. It doesn't matter how much this costs. Get this going." And some churches do Zoom church, and we've had to adapt through this, but I don't know how, in my context and my fellow congregations in my community, are ever going to turn that off, because it's reaching shut-ins and it's reaching people who go to their cottages in Florida and Arizona, and I'm all about the interaction and physicality of our being the body of Christ together, and as old and stodgy as I'm starting to feel, I'm recognizing that I don't know in many of our contexts if we're going to be able to go back. And so, how do we count membership? How do we stay connected with one another, with people who want to sit on their deck and watch church, as well as those who just can't come or ever come back and want to be connected. So it is changing, and it's going to change the way we relate with one another. Number four, leadership transitions. This one is going to be hard for me to hold it together to say, but I think, like other educational fields, we're going to be losing pastors. And in my denomination, the speculation is around 25% who are going to go sell cars or insurance, who are going to say, I've had enough. I want to get my congregations through this time. Some of us feel it in ourselves of saying, boy, I had a vision of staying where I am, staying here longer, and some things have been exposed in our life together that I'm not going to be able to unsee. And what is that? What's that going to mean? And I think it's going to mean that 6 months or a year from now, we're going to see more separations. We're going to see more pastors leaving, being asked to leave, more pastors saying, I'm done. And um, I'm going to leave it at that. Uh, Number 5, uh, time will tell. This isn't over yet, but it needs to be said. And denying a virus, and I want to say, uh, what I believe to be some denial from high levels la- last year, in particular, in our leadership. Denying or bullying a virus does not make it go away. So, with that comes some realities that we still have to find a way through. I count myself among the privileged that I've got 2 shots in my arm. A lot of my congregants who are over 60 have had at least one, but we've got a ways to go in this. And in Michigan, the variant numbers continue to rise. I haven't looked at Minnesota, but um, this is just, we're not done yet. Uh, so my wondering is, our community is going to reshuffle the deck with our members and our leaders and become even more red or blue? I hope not, but I wonder if that's going to happen. And I don't think that's good for anyone, because if I'm red, I need blue people in the room. And if I'm blue, I need red people in the room. Because if there's going to be any hope for this country, it's going to mean people who have very different perspectives sitting down and connecting and being community together. And I also think it's unclear what worship and community life is going to look like. I think we're still finding our way. So that's a lot in a little bit of time, but I want to pause for a moment around those 5 and see if you have feedback. If you have, oh, that should be added to the list, because we can learn together. Over.
I just appreciate you naming all these things. Uh, I had when we gathered for Ash Wednesday, we had like 70 some people in worship for the first time in, almost a year where the building was even somewhat full. And I thought I would be really ecstatic about all of that. And I got back to my office afterwards and I was almost in tears because I was angry. I was angry. It was the first time that it hit me of like how much we've lost in the last year. Like all these people that I haven't seen, that I don't get that time back with them. I don't, the kids that have grown and all of that sort of stuff. And so I named that at our church council meeting last week. I said I was just angry, and I think we need to be attentive to people's grief. Like as we gather together again, we're not all going to be in the same place. Some people are going to be, wanting to say, hey, I want to forget this. Like, let's just leave it in the past now and move forward. And other people are going to need to, it's going to hit them in ways they don't foresee. And I had a woman who's a children's librarian in town on council. And she said at the end of the meeting, she said, thank you so much for naming that. I couldn't figure out what I was feeling earlier today when I got a table, an activity table out that I hadn't touched in a year. And I opened it up and it had stuff for St. Patrick's Day in it from last year. And she said, I didn't know what I was feeling. But so I just wanted to say, I think people really appreciate it when you name things, even if you feel like you don't need to because it's obvious to you. It's not obvious to everyone in the room what people are feeling.
Thank you so much for that. That's right. And for sharing your experience about Ash Wednesday. We are looking at a lot of empty seating, or more than we did before. And that hurts. It hurts. Gina?
Yeah. Um, I know I've experienced, so we brought the hymnals back and singing in church, and so everybody's so excited. And I feel nothing. I'm like, whatever. It wasn't, but I did like, I went to my council back in November and was like, hey, I'm going to make a confession here. I'm a workaholic and it is killing me. I mean, it's destroying me. And, I really need some support with this. And I said, I know one of the ways is, it says in my contract, I have a mutual ministry committee. Could we get one started? Would you do that for me? And they're like, no. And and so then I asked, about help with like the fact that I didn't take all my vacation time last year. I realized I missed a whole month. I mean, a whole week. And I said, how does that work? Could I make that up this year? And they're like, nope, you use it or lose it. So, and I said, well, are there ways that we could try to help that, so I get a day off because right now I'm working 7 days a week. And they're like, you get Friday and Saturday off. And you work 5 days a week. And that's what you should work. So that's your responsibility. And we don't get help in our work and keeping up, our stuff. We have to take care of our own time management. You need to take care of your own time management. And all of that was very logical and practical. And I know it was totally their anxiety, the fact that their pastor said, hey, I feel like I'm, dying here. And it also broke my trust. And when you were talking earlier about attachment disorders and things like that, like I know I've got attachment disorders. I'm very aware, I'm very conscious, and I work very hard. And when that happened, it was like all that work went boom, like, however, I'm learning the Danes take about 3 months, 6 months, 10 months, a year to make a decision about something that was mentioned the year before. And so at our last meeting, they said, well, how do we get a mutual ministry committee started? And so I was like, well, I picked some people, you do, blah, blah, blah. I said, here's 2 people I would trust. And so I think we've got like 4 people picked. I think they're all from the council, but they're people I've gotten closer to. So we're going to try it out. I've never done mutual ministry. I have no clue, even though I've read the book and done the studies and all that. I don't know how it works in action. I don't know how it's going to work in action with, my farmer group. That's kind of like, oh, we're not going to talk about feelings.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I got to say, I was surprised that it took since November, but they had been munching on that. Well, what is the mutual ministry thing? And we do have that in our contract with her. So that gave me a little hope.
Good for you, Gina. Wow. I'm glad that moved in the direction that it did. Be wise with that. So if you're working with farmers who in general aren't highly emotive, then the comparison for them that they might be they might be able to understand is your tractor needs maintenance, your tractor needs rest, your equipment that you use, and that's a little depersonalized, but it's a way in to them. Um, and Gina reminds me of another piece of regression that may be more generalizable than I am aware of, but in my context too, I can't believe the number of times that um, colleagues as well as myself are experiencing a for the first time in my ministry, a sense of, well, you are our employee. Now, I've always been, prior to that, a pastor who's employed, but the defaulting into a business imagination around um, making my work transactional rather than transformational, and what are we getting out of this, and how many hours are you putting in. I'm hearing more and more pastors having to engage in those kinds of conversations, and I think theologically we need to have some conversations with our leaders around that, to say, uh, I'm your pastor, I'm your shepherd, I'm uh, if they're not able to embrace that kind of vocabulary, well, at the very least, I'm like since a lot of churches imagine themselves like a school, um, I'm at least a principal and you're the board, and I have a leadership role here that is more than just your employee.
I found the last three churches, at least two of them were kind of, well, one was a mega church and one was a large church. And board council were all CEOs of major companies and stuff. And so I have completely lost the sense of call. I don't even look at ministry as a calling anymore. It is an employment contract. That's what we refer to things. And we just use employee employment language because people don't believe in it anymore. So now the flip side of that is, okay, well then I will act like an employee and I'm free to come and go. I don't, take this job and shove it if I need to. I hate that, but I can't convince the whole theological calling, blah, blah, blah. That's gone. It's, have you earned your benefits? Do you get your bonus this year? I mean, this is constantly the language I hear. How are you meeting in your, expectation charts and your, so in my experience, the only time I hear being a pastor considered as a calling is in the ordination service, and that's it. So it's pretty dry.
These things, for all of us, deserve a whole another venue, I think, to talk about these kind of things. I'm glad you raised it.
Say something, please.
Matt, is it? Yep.
Yeah, in the regression part, I think, well, I know at least for sure one of my councils is not questioning anything at all. We are delusionally convinced that we have always done things well, and the fact that we will continue to do things well is going to result in this wonderful way that we're going to be able to capitalize on the ecclesiastical promiscuity. Those of you who have heard me at all know how laughable this is, but they believe that my preaching and teaching and healing is sufficient, that once we get a camera installed, and a fixed camera that shows me this tall 30 yards away, that people will tune in from everywhere and the donations will roll in and we will be restored to our rightful place. It's just insane. They truly, I mean, I have focused a lot on intentionally online services, but they want me to drop that and just do the service on camera, which doesn't draw people in real life. and they think that people at the lake and in Arizona and people will just, Facebook Live is going to make us a mega church out here on the prairie. It's nuts.
Hmm.
And I don't know what to say about it. I mean, they're so enthused and excited, and they're never enthused and excited. I mean, we are an old, a very deeply Norwegian church, and we don't smile but twice a year. But my goodness, they think that I am their own personal Jesus in a sense. As long as I do it, I'm so darn good at it, then, you know, it's crazy.
Diagnostically, that's sort of magical thinking. Hmm. Thank you for that, Matt. Others, or keep rolling? I always wait for Laura's nod.
I want to quick jump in
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, please.
My connection's not great, so I'll keep the video off so you can hopefully hear me.
Is this
Um,
Dane?
Yeah, Dane.
Okay.
I'm in a
Okay.
church in Wilmer. So,
Okay.
so I feel like others have been dancing around this a little bit, and some of your comments hit on this. I feel like we're in this kind of in between time where we're caught between very intentional trying to reach people during time of pandemic when we are quarantined and across the airwaves, and yet we're starting to move in that direction of being back in person, and yet not quite. And I think those are two very big things to dance around. I'm also thinking about how much of our ministry is so relational, interpersonal, in person, and I don't know if I have a fully formed question, but where do you see the church going in this time of knowing that many people are not ready to be in person, and yet I think that is also in some ways killing us, that we can't have that human touch and interaction, and how do we live into that tension, I guess?
Well, I think I want my internet to cut out right now. 'Cause Dane, I think that's the question, and I find myself wondering with my staff here, what can we do to protect and preserve the good that we have? So rather than thinking of something new, if we imagine this as a virus ravaging the body, or cancer ravaging the body, um, you could take a surgical approach, you could take a chemotherapy approach, you could take a radiation approach, and right now the defenses of the body seem really high around that. So I find myself saying with our staff, so what's the immunotherapy that we can do? Taking the good cells out, doing something, multiplying them, and sticking them back in to the body of Christ here, and trying to prevent further harm, further emotional interpersonal damage. And so my short-term thought on that is, what in the world can we be doing like crazy outside this summer? As it gets spring, can we do brats and burgers outside using care? Should we have fire pit nights where we gather people together? Can we, should we be planning outdoor services when that's a lot of heavy lifting, but something to protect and preserve the togetherness? What can we do missionally together here? So these are the kinds of things that I find myself saying, this is the 1 to 6 month plan, because I don't know. I just don't want more damage to body life. One of the things we're doing, I don't know if you face this, but there's just some wacky theology and end time stuff that's getting pumped out there, and our people are reading and talking about here. And so in April and May, we're bringing in a ringer who's uh, studied in the tradition of N.T. Wright to talk about the end times from a reformed perspective. Um, and nobody here really sees why I've written that prescription for my community. They're going to think, oh, this is good theology. She comes from Australia and the United Kingdom. She's got excellent pedigree. They're going to experience it that way and not realize that this is my antibiotic to some of the stuff that's going on in my community. And so I wonder if there are things like that that you as a local practitioner can think about in your community that would be just an easy win, a little win that they don't understand how impactful and how countertextual this could be. But I suspect there's no one in your community who knows better than you what simple kinds of things could be an easy win to sort of keep the ship together as much as possible as we try and make it to the fall when hopefully things are better and brighter than they are now. That's a lousy answer, Dane, but that's my attempt.
No, I love that. It's very helpful.
Okay. I like Dane. He's very gracious. Any others? Keep rolling.
Just related to that thought about immunotherapy, I also think about inoculation, in the sense that, during Lent, I every couple of years do a book study sermon series instead of, and this year I did one on Adam Hamilton from Resurrection Church always has books that are very accessible to my people and they love them. And this year we did one called Unafraid, Living with Courage and Hope in Uncertain Times. And it is not theologically deep or psychologically deep even, but it is connecting and normalizing that fear is a gift that can that can get away from us, and talking about the function of fear in our life, and then how do we deal with fear of different things in a faithful way, in a psychologically helpful way, in a hopeful way. And I did it thinking about the political stuff, but I think that I'm hoping that it will create a frame of conversation now as we go forward to say, okay, is it, how are we relating to our fear, and helping them realize like that heart palpitation, that's a gift gone sideways. Like you're going to be okay, Yep. So if anybody's interested in that, I can share that information.
Thank you for that, Andrea.
I almost hesitate to say this because I don't want to seem overly positive. But when Dane was talking, I was writing some phrases down. And then when you shared just the reality that we're in Minnesota right now with COVID, and I wrote, we're the people of the already and the not yet, usually. I mean, we are people who live in this, God's kingdom is here, but not fully. And so I put our time is now, the already and the not yet. We're inching into something. We're living in it. And I put, we're made for this. We are people of hope. What are we putting our hope in? So when Mark's sharing about our imagination and what language we use with our people, I've also been preaching on the Old Testament this Lent, the text, and the being in the wilderness so that we can be broken open to be recreated. And so if we've been broken open in this past year, what are we glimpsing of God's church for the future? That I like to talk like that. We get glimpses of God's kingdom, not yet its fullness. So we're getting glimpses of what the church might be. And in the midst of that, it's very hard. I understand that, colleagues. But in the best place, when I'm in my best places, sometimes I get in a pretty positive mood. So so that book, Unafraid, Living with Courage and Hope. Thanks for that, Andrea, just to keep my own perspective, because as leaders, then what do we do when we carry that weight of trying to process our own grief and loss for the year and walking with a whole congregation or congregations trying to do the same. So so I'm grateful for this group, CGP, to help support us.
So you remind me that the stories we tell matter a lot. And a couple of years ago, we tried to say that we want to be a community that practices love in action, and so we put out to our congregation Bob Goff's book, Love Does. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Bob Goff or that book, but he's an incredible nut. And you can read that book and not be theologically challenged at all. But what you're challenged with is how he chooses to relate to strangers and other people. And he's like a Robert Fulghum on steroids with ADHD. And so some of his interactions with people, if you as a preacher told some of those stories or introduced some of that kind of thing, it sort of pulls people out of their entrenched stinginess or self-protectiveness in this time, and could potentially give them a new imagination on how to relate to other people. But um, as I look back in terms of my congregational leadership in this place, Love Does was an important book along the way until people really got sick of his stories, and then we had to put it away. Any others? Laura, I don't see you on my screen, so I'm guessing you might be nodding somewhere. So I'm going to keep going.
Sounds good. I'm
Okay.
I'll nod now. Yes.
Okay, very good. So here's the last book I want to knowingly lift before you, and I don't remember if I mentioned this before. George Kohlreiser wrote Hostage at the Table. He's the one who said, I've never had a hostage situation where someone wasn't having something unfinished in themselves, that they were taking hostages to try and take control over what they were feeling. Well, he has a concept of leadership that I don't hear much about, and I talk about as much as I can. And one of the reasons why I gravitate toward it is because he uses attachment theory, and he's all about that. And so the question that I'd want to step back from and say, before talking about this book, is to say, so what do churches need right now as we find our way through? And I'm going to say what I hung beneath there is, I think they need a relationship. They need a sense of security, of stability, of trust and confidence. They need to know what to do. Instead of just sitting and watching the news all day, they need to be encouraged and empowered to do something. And they need to find coming through, I don't want to say coming out of, but coming through some kind of new sense of togetherness and solidarity. And then I begin thinking about, well, how does the leader model that or help make that happen? And so what I want to do is talk about this book, but I want to draw on the importance of, or the concept of, secure base. And in attachment theory, if you have a sense of security, if you have attachment security, let's say as one of these toddlers whose mother or caregiver has left the room, and you know she's going to come back, you know that when he does that, everything's going to be okay. One of the benefits of attachment security, of having that secure base within yourself, a relationship that gives you a sense of security, is that you are freer to explore, and you have higher levels of empathy. And this shows up in young children who have that, and it's astonishing. Maybe you've seen, there's a video or a Vine or a something that I don't know what to call it, of a small child who's in front of a big screen television, and the person on the TV begins to cry, and that child goes and gets a Kleenex and starts wiping the screen as a 2 or 3 year old. And now, from a clinical perspective, you got to. So how did that happen? What has that child learned? That there's such a degree of empathy there, that this is the response. This is a child that doesn't just yawn when someone else yawns, which is another marker of empathy. Doesn't just mirror back the sadness that someone might feel, but goes beyond that, digs deeper within themselves to reach out to someone else. That speaks to me of a fine example of someone who has security within themselves. So the idea of a secure base, which is all over attachment theory, was something that psychology grabbed from the military, and the military has had a conceptualization that if you go into a new territory or into another country, what do? But you establish a perimeter, and you make that secure, and then you fly your airplanes or you move your troops out of that, and your troops know that they don't have to go all the way across the world again to be secure. All they have to do is get back to that place. Well, psychology said, yeah, that's phenomenal language, or a phenomenal image to talk about what human beings need. And so I want to say every person needs a secure base. We need a relationship, a secure place to go home to, where we can be safe, where we can be secure. Well, followers need leaders to be a secure base. Maybe not the ultimate one, but they need to know that in a leader, that is a person who can be trusted. Their behaviors are predictable. They're consistent, and when followers have that, what happens is that trust grows. Now, I'm one who doesn't believe that trust is earned. I think trust is given. And so if I make my life's work in my congregation about trying to earn your trust, well, first of all, then that's all about my performance. And there are some people that are just never going to give it. They're just, maybe they're not capable, maybe they don't want to. So I'm not going to work myself to death to try and earn your trust. But what I'm going to try and do is live in such a way and work in such a way that behaviors are predictable, they're reliable, they're trustworthy, they could even be anticipated, so that people move to a place where they begin to give trust. And if people give that to me, that is something that's the last thing in the world that I ever want to spend or squander. And what begins to happen is a relationship begins to form that can be, um, has some reciprocity to it, where there can be mutual learning, where there can be mutual growing, and again, where morality, and motivation levels begin to be lifted. Now, in Kohlreiser's concept, his leadership book, Care to Dare, it's all about enacting these kinds of behaviors in yourself as a leader, and in your leader-follower relationships, so that your organization, for him, presumably a business, I don't remember him ever talking about a church, but so that your community, your organization, um, can become itself, whether you're making widgets or you're a church, where it can become a secure base for other people. Now, to me, what a beautiful picture of what I want the church to be. I want this to be, I want this community, not just this building, to be a safe place, a safe haven for people who need it, whether you've called this place home forever, or if you live across the street and only orient yourself according to that big white building with pillars. My building doesn't have that, but that's a mental model for church. You know what I mean? And so Care to Dare is about what are the practices of the leader, of the organization, then that can help you become a secure base, whether it's a leader, whether it's the organization, whether it's your church. How do you get there? Well, he says, and I'm going to summarize. I think there's 9 of them. Number 1 is to stay calm. So we know that anxiety is contagious. Well, so can calmness and steadiness. What do we read in Matthew's gospel in the early chapters? Herod was anxious, and all Jerusalem with him. I was with a pastor a couple years ago who had a council member just go off on him in a council meeting, and he just stayed steady, and there was silence. And a day later, one of his leaders came to him and said, Pastor, I got to tell you, I don't know how you kept your cool, but I tell you what, no one in the room failed to notice that. He said, by you staying calm, the rest of us could stay calm, and they could move forward together. And it's not easy. But my analogy that I've given before too is, if you've coached Little League, boy, if you can get one of those 7-year-olds to get a hit, you better believe the rest of them are going to be in that way too. So how does this happen? How does it happen for you as a pastor? How do you stay calm? You stay connected to your secure base or your secure bases, whether that's your romantic partnership, whether that's your therapist or a ministry support group or whatever. But wherever those places are, you need to be able to fly your life missions out of that kind of place, and you need to be able to return there so that you can restore, refuel, replenish, to go out again. And I don't, this is probably oversharing, but I've got a 12-minute drive from my house to my congregation, and 5 minutes away from the building that I'm in is a set of railroad tracks that lead to the main artery, the main road to my house. And those set of railroad tracks is my mental model from when I am making the transition to entering into the fray and also exiting it. So there have been times where I visually, forgive me because this is silly, but this is me, I have visually imagined myself going over those railroad tracks and putting on my hazmat suit to protect me from what I'm about to engage in work and church life, or gowning up like a medical practitioner as I'm getting ready to do what I need to do. And there have been times when I've driven away, when I get to those railroad tracks, and that's the place where I shed them, and I sort of decontaminate, and I've got 5-7 minutes yet before I get home, and as I do, then I can shake off and I can shed some of that stuff, so I can be present for my kids and for my spouse, and not kick the dog because I'm frustrated with work. I don't have a dog, but you know what I mean. So that becomes the boundary line for me between entering and exiting, and sort of gearing up and gearing down. And I if that's a helpful analogy for you, find your way of doing that. But that is a move for me of moving closer toward my secure base, which is not my church, which is not my community. It's not my job. My job is not it's not a secure base. It's a place for ministerial engagement that I take it matters deeply to me and seriously to me, but I also have to be able to look forward to my house and my relationships as a key island for me of refuge, and that helps me stay calm. Number two, accepts the individual. So that means to appreciate differences in transformational leadership. This means individualized consideration. It means paying attention to others, taking note of them. It's not looking at how what I can get out of a volunteer or a staff member as if they're only instrumental to my goals, my sense of need, but learning to appreciate and affirm and bring out in other people without judgment or criticism, and in some respects, it's choosing to take those gifts, even though those wonderful flowers come with a lot of thorns and weeds, to choose to look at the flower. That takes work on our part, but to see the assets in asset language of what somebody brings, and to be sensitive to their story that they bring. Number three, sees the potential. So the fruit of seeing someone's inherent value is also seeing their potential, and sometimes only a pastor can see um, uh, the possibilities that are in someone in 3, 5, 7 years. And if I told you this story, forgive me, but I've encountered three female pastors who are not common in my tradition. It's around 10% or so in my denomination are women, but I've encountered three who said it was sometime in middle school, in junior high, in 6th through 8th grade, that my pastor said to me, I could imagine you being a pastor someday, and they've said, I'll never forget that. Well, someone saw something in them, planted the seed, and wow, look at how the Spirit created the conditions for that to grow. What a wonderful thing. Uh, those three women may not think that after 2020, but what a wonderful thing for the church that those pastors, those mentors, those leaders in their life saw something and named it. Oh, I messed up my numbering again. So it uses listening and inquiry. So instead of speaking in certitudes, instead of like in business and management, sort of laying out this is how it is, secure based leaders use curiosity instead of telling people, and they listen. And they've recognized that listening and inquiry is a way for people to feel valued and heard, and it's a way to get insight that we wouldn't otherwise have. So it's just plain smart. Number five, delivers a powerful message using simple sentences, phrases, and affirmations to ground people and give them something to memorably latch onto in the storm. So when someone comes to you and they've got all of this stuff going on and they don't know what to do, it's empowering for you to say, yeah, but remember, you have choices. When someone feels like all of this stuff is happening, for someone who's perceived as older, wiser, or a parent figure, to say, yeah, but you have choices. You've communicated to that. That's a message of empowerment. And don't underestimate that. It's like the coach who says, I believe in you. Some of us have been in horrible crisis situations, and someone says, I do not know how I'm going to get up tomorrow morning. If you have a pastoral relationship with them, there is a time for you to be able to say, but just know it's not always going to feel this way. When someone's in the grieving process and they're doing this roller coaster, you as a pastor can say, uh, I'm just checking in. I'm just giving you a phone call. I recognize there's a lot of ups and downs. How are things today? Oh, Pastor, today, last time I talked to you, it was really bad, but I'm glad to say today's a new day, and that's good. Well, that can also be a time to say, well, just know grief is a process, and mourning takes a while, and you know with the ups and downs of this, I'm so glad it's an up day, but just know, tomorrow or next week, it might not feel as good as it does today. Well, you can speak that in the low points too, and they will take those words with them when they hit the highs and lows as well, and that's powerful. Once a year I try and say to my congregation, somewhere in any sermon, I'll use the phrase, isn't it something that God trusts us with this, that God trusts you with that? And I, especially with my older contingent, my over 60s, they are always the ones to say, wow, yeah, I never really thought of it that way, that God trusts me. Well, once they get out of their Calvinistic fears around now being entrusted with something and having to do something perfect and right, I don't know if Lutherans have that or not, but there is a moment where they say, wow, God, yeah, God trusts me. Never thought about that, Pastor. Well, trust me, I've said this for 15 years to these people, and every year it's brand new. So that might be a reason to keep saying it. Number six, focuses on the positive. So we know in the way creation works is whatever you put your time and attention to will grow. So you as a leader have the ability to orchestrate attention on the things that you want to grow. So that often means focusing on the goals and the hopes and the possibilities. So I think of where Dane brought me an hour ago or whatever it was to be thinking about, well, what does this church need right now? Well, they need to be together. They may not need a Bible study. They just might need to eat and drink together. So uh, what can I do? What can I suggest as a leader that will orchestrate attention on our need to fellowship and maybe say to a team, a counselor, a staff, I know that what our church really needs right now is to be together, but I don't necessarily have the creative juices for what that could look like. Well, trust me, there are people in the room who will, well, hey, I have an idea. They're the quick starts that will see things that you and I, some of us, aren't able to see, and then they'll be mobilized around it. And good academic deans do this. They say, here's what we're really after, and faculty members will say, well, here's an idea. And a good dean will say, wow, thank you for thinking about that. Is there any way we can make something like that happen? You've just turned them loose. By your affirmation, you've given your blessing and some guardrails on it to say, well, I wish I would have thought of that. How can we do that together? So what I always say in pre-marriage counseling is to a couple, whatever you put your time and attention to will grow. What irritates you about him right now, I assure you, 10 years from now will probably still irritate you. What you need to put your time and attention to is what you treasure and what you cherish. And that's the work for all of us who are in partnerships to say, okay, there's this constellation of stuff that bugs the heck out of me, but I'm going to focus on this because this is what's really most important. And I think in the relationships we have with church people and in the congregation, certainly in our leadership, the focusing on the positive, uh, it, it it increases positivity. And I'm not saying deny the other stuff, but to say, yeah, uh, all of those things are true, but we really want to put our time and attention on this because wherever our focus is, that's the thing that's going to grow. I wonder which of my 9 I've missed. Your final copy of the PowerPoints will have it. Encourage risk taking, helping people challenge themselves, helping them realize their potential and expand beyond what they currently imagine. You provide presence or reassurance that an unachieved goal or failure is not only okay, but it's part of the process. So I'm guessing for most of us at some point in our life, a parent or a grandparent uh, set our butts on a bicycle and said, "You can do this." And you and I who've done that know how the first 6 times went. It was skin knees and elbows, and it was scary, and yet it was the presence and the reassurance that and the coming alongside that enabled us to take the risk to do that, and in many cases ride a bike. And if you can't do that, my illustration would be at the age of 4, I had a extremely traumatic experience with a bozo who held me underwater when we were at play, and it was a big kid. Well, that made me scared to death of the water forever, and it wasn't until 12 that I finally learned how to swim, and it happened because my dad was in the deep end of the pool, and he said, "Mark, I think you can do it, and I'm here for you." And there's few times in my life that I can remember the terror that I felt, and I'm not using that word casually, to step into the pool, and it went fine. I I I guess I did know how to swim, but I didn't ever dare. But I could have never done it without my dad in the pool, encouraging me on, not pushing, not just throwing me in the deep end, but saying, "I'm here, it'll be okay." And some sense in myself, before I turn 50, maybe I better learn how to swim. All of those factors were in play, and we have the role to be the dad, the mom, the one in the deep end of the pool, the one who held the back end of a banana seat for me on a bicycle, who said, "You're gonna, it'll be okay, and you might have some slip ups or whatever, but it'll still be okay." Number 8, inspires through intrinsic motivation. So, motivating followers to act not according to threat or reward. And that's what happens in employer employee relationships, but based on their interest, their curiosity, their enjoyment, fulfillment, desire to learn and grow. So, what is it that you find enjoyable? What in church life? You like handing out bulletins? Well, we've got a job for you. You like serving behind the scenes? Well, how can I make that happen? Well, this is a very organic approach rather than saying we have these 7 slots to fill, and well, we have to fill the slot. Well, maybe we need to move from slots to saying, let's start with the incarnation to say, what do we have, and how can we use it? Again, my recollection is Lutherans have been uh, pioneering, or maybe the most pioneering on asset-based community. And if I'm wrong, then I'm paying you a high compliment. But I've just been amazed with what I've read around asset-based stuff, and I think it comes from Lutheran. So that thinking not just in uh, in in organization now, but in particular people. What are their assets, and how can I encourage them to bring that out in themselves? Number 9, signals accessibility. So, rooted in attachment theory, leaders are like reliable parents who are older and wiser and available in times of need or distress. And this is what's tricky for us because I want to be available for my congregation, but I don't necessarily want to be available on vacation, and I don't want to be available on Friday or Saturday. And yet, we also know that there are those times where uh, being available and accessible pays high dividends. So sometimes church members just want to know. uh, some want to know, well, what are your hours at church? Because I want to know if you're putting in enough time. But some people are asking that question because they just want to know when it's fair game have access to you. And I think it's work. It'll take work for some of us to try and see and try and look at the need that they're expressing when they ask those kind of questions, rather than seeing that as a they're trying to control us. And again, I don't want to deny that some of that's in the room, but there's probably more than that in the room as well. So how do we how do we do that? I very practically, whenever I send a communication out to my congregation, I always put in a tagline, something like, if you have questions, contact me. Feel free to ask me. Feel free to email me, call me, have coffee. Um, I'll always put that kind of thing in. And 99 times out of 100, someone doesn't take me up for the coffee, breakfast, or lunch invitation, but they know it's there. It's perpetually offered. And I got a friend of mine who's in real estate, and he said one of the strategies of real estate they teach you in real estate school is you buy you buy 4 tickets to a professional baseball game, and you say, my spouse and I are going to go, and I'm going to call a number of clients, and I'm going to say to them, oh, I got some last minute tickets to the baseball game, would you like to come? And he said 9 times out of 10, all the people you call will say, oh no, thanks for thinking of me last minute. And he said it's as if you took all of them to the Tigers game. But you've signaled an availability and accessibility that feels a little manipulative. I'm not encouraging that as a pastor, but the idea of saying, hey, I'm here, I value you, I care about you, I care about this relationship, and I want to be here, especially in your time of need. So I think Laura sent out some questions, and these were things that I just thought as conversational kindling. Is there something you want to talk about from today or previous conversations? Some of you have shared your own experiences, which I think is great, and your own questions. But as I look at it, we've got 30 minutes or so that we could use for dialogue and Q&A, and I'm just gonna just put that out there and see what happens. And Laura will moderate because she's good at that.
I'll do my best. There's been some really rich conversation going on in the chat. And I just wonder if anyone wants to lift up anything that they've shared there instead of me trying to, recap your thoughts.
I can just say I feel like we're all in agreement that this whole topic is rich for our own experience of people being kind of so stuck on their own anxiety and grief that they don't think about other people, and having some empathy with that we are all in that mode in many ways, and this kind of cultural anxiety is weighing on everyone. And so providing these spaces where we can deal with that openly and care for people and give them something to hold on to is really vital work.
I thank you for that. I want to speak a word of there are times where I think we've talked about sort of best practices or some ideas or imagination. I want to give you an example of a probably a not good one. If you started the presentation early, I made a shameless endorsement for the Happy Givers website. They've got cool shirts, and I have no connection to them, but I wear a Love Your Neighbor mask to church, and on Sunday I finished preaching and I had my mask on, and one of my congregants came up to me, and he's a trusted supporter, encourager, and he said to me, "So, Pastor," he said, how's it going for you? Are you able to love your neighbor?" And uh, I said without thinking, I said, "I'm finding it." I said, "To be honest, I'm finding it really easy to love my neighbor." I said, "These days I'm finding it harder to love some of my church members." Um, I wish I would not have said that. Now, it hasn't bit me anywhere, but it is speaking to my fatigue. It's speaking to my, should I have done that? I don't think I should have done that. And so I need to take that as a dashboard indicator of, Mark, you got to pay attention to that. Um, and I don't think it did any harm. I think he actually appreciated the honesty, but where I said it and the fact that it just came out so quickly, is something I need to pay attention to. And so, in whatever ways you've heard some of this material and these stories, uh, and and said, "Oh, yeah, that's something worth holding up," just know it's coming from someone feeling as fractured and damaged and bruised as you, perhaps.
My computer's battery might die here in a minute, so I'm going to say thank you before I disappear suddenly. But I was just going to say, I think what today's topic especially brought home to me is, the overall thing of attachment disorder, I think, is just such a rich ground for thinking about pastoral ministry and leadership. So thank you for being sort of an introduction to thinking of this in this way. Um, in normal times, I feel like we're all tempted to have the success or failure of our congregation riding on our shoulders. And it feels like that's even more true now, of just like, if this thing goes down, it's my fault. And I've got plenty of people who are more than willing to tell me it's going to be my fault. And that just says, I mean, that again reflects like, how is that their fault that they're reflecting that to me? Or is it because I need to do more work on actually separating my sense of self from my work as a pastor, and to say, like, I love the church, I love this place, and I love these people. But if this thing falls apart, it can't mean that my life is over. It can't mean that suddenly I'm destroyed. And I don't know where we as leaders, we need to find that root, that grounding, that core of who we are, and make sure that that's healthy. But man, I think you've put your finger right on the heart of all of this for so much of us. So I just wanted to say thanks. I don't have any answers to that, but I think you've named the problem really, really well.
Thank you, Brian. I'd love to respond to that and say I think it's important. A couple things are important to recognize, that our the individuals in our congregation and our congregation as a whole, and we ourselves, are not naturally operating out of our best spots. And I think I want to encourage you to say that from your pulpits with some regularity, because that names one of these guys, um, and then it gives the possibility of a grace note to say, I want to go back to my parishioner and say, "I'm glad that I have a relationship with you that's such that I could be honest with you with how I'm feeling, but I still regret saying that I want to hold myself to a better bar to, um, to not overshare to that degree." The other thing I think we need to take notice of is uh, uh, twice today it's been spoken, the word phrase attachment disorder has been spoken, and I don't want to I don't want to critique that. What I want to do is clarify that to say we all have attachment styles. We all have um, you know, anxiety, anxiety, avoidance, or security. But as I did in my study, I did not look for a diagnostic category to diagnose a pastor as anxious, avoidant, uh, or uh, or secure, but instead looked at their behaviors. So um, we shouldn't kid ourselves for a minute to say if we have attachment security that we don't have some of the pathology that comes with anxiety and avoidance. And we shouldn't think that if we are diagnostically avoidant that there may not be places of security and anxiety as well. And so I'm just like I'm reluctant to say a disabled person. I want to say a person with disabilities. I want to say all of us have attachment issues. All of us have, and our congregations have attachment issues. When uh, when we put disorder on there, I get a little squeamish. So again, I don't want to correct what any of you have said when you've used that word pair, but what I want to say is to clarify. I think it's a lens to look through, and because some of our behaviors are blended in terms of our motives and and their expressions, it's not always easy to separate security and anxiety. Uh, uh, they can be muddled together. So just like in CPE, when you say, well, Laura, you just need to be a non-anxious presence. Ugh. Well, Laura might be uh, a perfectionist enough to have one hint of her own anxiety and say, get all anxious about all that one way in which she's still anxious, and so the goal needs to be no, you're not going to be able to be a non-anxious presence. Just give yourself that freedom. The goal is to be a less anxious presence, to be aware of your anxiety, to befriend it, to live with it. And the same thing with the avoidance and the anxiety in our congregations. It won't serve us or them well to say, um, well, you're all screwed up or you're all dysfunctional or whatever. In close contact, we can say, yeah, I'm dysfunctional, you're dysfunctional, but we better have relationship to do that. I just want to urge some care around how we talk about disorders. And I suspect you hear that, and please don't hear it as critique.
When I saw the questions that were sent out, it was like, what are the one or two takeaways? One of the things that I realized is that um, I've done a lot of work on my grief this year. My mom died 5 weeks before COVID hit, so February 7th. And so the first few months of COVID are just flat out a blur, which is a gift, just like the blur is a gift with every grief, I think. And there's been a part of me that's like, oh, I shouldn't be spending this much time doing like seeing a counselor weekly. Like that's like feeling like, oh, that's, I don't know, like not good somehow, or that's not, you know, but this has given me permission to realize, okay, no, the stuff that I'm figuring out, it's giving me a sense of, no, this is professional work. You know, I do it during my work day and I feel like, oh, you know, I'm not working. It's like, no, I am. And part of that is reckoning with the ways that every grief lives in the same part of my heart. Like they all are neighbors in that part of my heart. And so everything is interconnected. And so giving me a capacity for empathy when the stuff that we've been talking about in the comment thread has been the ways that the I want church to open isn't really about church or worship at all. It's about political control and identity and values, and my values aren't being valued and all that kind of stuff. It's like it's all those griefs are interconnected. And so I really appreciate the framework and the affirmation that we live in a culture of loss. We need to in a community of loss. We need to do our work. So thank you.
Good for you for sticking with the therapy, because that may be your most important hour of the week. It's for you, but ultimately it will be for your congregation in ways that they may not be able to recognize.
And to tell people that I'm doing it has been I still remember this woman who was struggling with, I don't want to go back on my anxiety meds. I feel like a failure because I can't handle this. This was before COVID. And I'm like, if you had high blood pressure, you wouldn't hesitate to take the right kind of pill. Like if you're dealing with anxiety or depression. And I admitted to her that I'm on an antidepressant, and all of a sudden everything switched for her. And so that maybe there's the secure base piece of that. Like, it's okay. We're there. We're all in it together. Like, you're not failing. I'm going to hold your bike up. It's okay. I like that image. The permission giving to people instead of feeling shame about stuff.
Yes. Yep. Well, and Andrea, I don't know your story, but I know people who have engaged this. But I think one of the first losses that happens to people oftentimes in grade school is, I need glasses. And I listened to my wife talk about when she was in second or third grade and needed to get glasses, and that was in an era where, yeah, you were 4 eyes and you were all of that, but who in their right mind would suggest that for a minute that you going to an optometrist to get glasses to help you see better and see more clearly? Who would be against that? And somehow, as a society, we've moved through that to say, well, no, of course that's a necessity. And I think when my 22-year-old kids are 40 or 50, I think therapy is going to be more like that. And pastors, by the behaviors that you're modeling, are bringing that reality to us sooner. So thank you for that.
There was some great conversation in the chat about giving your time and attention to the things that you want to grow. And I just think we all have examples of giving our time and attention to things that we haven't been able to see growth, or we give a lot of time and attention to, and people say that they want that, and then they actually don't show up or they don't do the thing. Is there anything you would speak into about that, just sort of ongoing nature of trying to like provide things for people or minister to people in a certain way that they say they want, and then it not being readily apparent to us that it's growing?
Is that a question for everyone or me?
Well, but I would love for people to speak into that too, if they've got some wisdom.
My first response, and feel free to jump in, anyone, is to say I'm more aware than ever that what pastors expressing needs is a great foreign object to church leaders, and I'm also aware that it can make them uncomfortable, And I'm aware that most of these things will involve some kind of negotiation. And so when you say you need to put your time and attention to something that's near and dear to you, that may need to enter into a process. It may need to enter into a mixing bowl for some of those things to happen, because I don't know that that church communities have been built for this. Pastors have either had way too much power and authority or haven't had enough. And that might be another cultural dynamic that we are working ourselves through. In my tradition, the old word for a pastor was a dominee, which in Dutch means Lord, uh, which is, I have a picture of Lord Vader in my head when I hear that. But there was that much command and respect and veneration, which, was probably overkill. But now I get emails from parishioners that say, "Hey, Mark." Well, I don't, I don't necessarily care for that either. So I think when we talk about, um, you know, putting our time and attention to those things that are most important, expect some resistance.
I really appreciated the premarital connection there, and what I guess what I'm thinking as I hear you say that, Mark, is that for me the most direct examples of places where I invest my time and attention, where it's easiest to see those things growing, is with relationships, with connection, with intimacy, with trust. And not so much when it comes to like programmatic output kinds of things, because there's so many other mitigating factors that affect. I've invested thousands of hours in completely pointless programs that never went anywhere. And so I wonder if there's maybe some distinction between where that's most visibly applicable and where it's sometimes harder to see.
Yeah, that's so good. I don't know how to answer it.
I have no idea what I said, so let me maybe try to rephrase a different way. I think it's easy to see growth in relationship stuff where we invested attention,
Yep.
but it's harder to see payoff in like generative programmatic output things where we invest our attention.
Yep, I think that's well said. I think I told you folks the story about the pastor whose dad died, and the pastor was a celebrity preacher. And after 15 years of listening to this guy's preaching, the guy said, "I still remember that your dad called me on my birthday. That's what I remember." And that, to me, that's a story that needs to be told in every seminary. That the encounters in ministry that happen in the hardware store, in the grocery lane. Little old Sadie, who ran her cart into me 10, 15 years ago, who was 89, in the grocery store, and she said, "Pastor, I didn't think I'd see you here. I never imagined you eating." I'm looking at my belly thinking, seriously? No, but she never thought about that. And she would always be, until the day I buried her, she'd always go back to that. "I still remember seeing my pastor in the grocery store." So we have no idea about the little things that matter so much. So, Matt, I want to affirm your sentiment about the interpersonal stuff is going to be, I think, much longer lasting. These are the mustard seeds in the kingdom that are going to be so much more than organizational or institutional building. I think think the call for pastors is to pour our energies into those kind of things, and then all these other things will be added to you, and maybe we won't even have to worry about it because the Spirit will do it.
There's a question posed by Kate in the chat that I wanted to lift up in our remaining time. It's a really thoughtful question. She says, something I've been wondering about, do we need separate categories for grief and entitlement? There are things we have been given that perhaps have been given to us unequally. Losing that privilege can feel like grief, but to me it seems different than losing someone we love, losing an identity, etc. Do we need separate language and practices to talk about this, or should we still understand this as a form of grief?
Well, that's about all the time we have for today. It's really good.
I'm super glad you're the teacher.
So my response to that is I think it is a it is a grief. It's a lot. Well, it's a loss for sure, and it's a loss of a dream of this is the way I've imagined my world. So my daughter, when she went to college, had gone to her first class, and then she saw all of these students, and most of them happened to be African American, racing off to the library or the media center, and she didn't understand it. And so she asked about it, and well, they were all heading to the computer lab, or what I would know is they were headed to the public campus computers, and she learned that uh, they didn't have a computer. Well, my daughter got her first iPad or MacBook Pro in sixth grade, and her school gave it to her. And then in high school, they gave her another one. And then when she graduated from high school, she got that as a graduation gift. She's on her third MacBook Pro of her life that she could own and take responsibility for. And it wasn't until college that she realized that there are other people who don't have that, and it was the so she felt shame around that. She felt a sense of loss, and in her world, the way she had imagined it, it had to change, and she had to go through a process to do that. So all of us who have had and who are aware of our privileges, I think, um, regularly mitigate again. Create our relationships and behaviors in a way of pushing against the exposure to another reality, because we don't want to see it. But when that reality punctures that, and now we have to face it, it awakens all of this stuff in us. And so are we going to learn from that, or are we going to, hunker down and just say, well, what's the matter with those people that they don't have computers, or they don't work as hard as I do, or and all of that stuff is what pastors are regularly trying to untangle in the life of our congregation. I don't know if that's my response. I don't know if that will satisfy. But that feels like somewhere between a C plus and a B plus, so I'll take it. So I want to bless you folks in your important work, because these are hard times, and your congregations don't know this, but they are depending on you to be well, and to be as well and balanced and secure as you can. And I want to encourage you to do what you need for your sake, but also for theirs, uh, to pursue health and wholeness, whatever that looks like for you.
Well, thank you for that blessing, and for these workshops have just been incredibly rich. Just the feedback, the emails that I've gotten in between sessions, and it's just been, this is really getting at the heart of who we are as people and who we are as called to this public church leadership. So thank you for speaking into it so well, and for just the teaching and the revelations that are happening in each of us. Really, really, really important. So, and one of the things, I'll be curious, we'll send out an evaluation to everybody, but I would like to know what this spurs for you. Like, what's next? What should we dig into next? As called public leaders in the church. Because I think, Mark, you've identified, you put your finger on the pulse of something that I think we could talk about for the rest of our days. So I would love to hear your feedback on what seems like a next progression of what we should talk about. And who knows, Mark, maybe in the future we'll have you, actually, maybe we'll all get together, in a room or a retreat center somewhere, someday that will happen, because it won't always be like this, right?
Right. That's right.
And we can take it even further, so what a rich time. So thank you, and thanks everyone for showing up and for your thoughtful questions and reflections.
And if it happens, I will bring Tusk.
I think that seems like a requirement. So
Yeah.
been part of each of these already. So are there any parting comments or from anybody else? Well, I'm grateful for all that you do, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks for connecting the dots, Amy.
Thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks,
Amy
everybody.
Carlson, people for
Care.
the win. She introduced me to Mark, so yay.
Laura, I will send you corrected PowerPoints and
Okay.
figure out what I forgot.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Take care, all.
That sounds fine. Yeah, this has just been great.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, Amy. Do I need to? Oh, I probably have to stop recording.
Yeah.
Yes.